The gavel fell, its sharp crack lost in the cavernous silence of the ornate courtroom. All eyes were on Thomas Braddock, a man whose expensive suit couldn't conceal the ugliness twisting his handsome features. He pointed a trembling manicured finger not at the opposing counsel, but at his own pregnant wife, Felicia. She was a mistake. He spat the venomous words echoing off the polished marble. A disastrous, regrettable mistake. And that thing she's carrying is a mistake I refuse to pay for. A wave of gasps rippled through the gallery. But the real drama wasn't in his calculated cruelty. It was in the worn, leather-bound folder the judge had just placed on his bench, a folder containing the last will and testament of the one man Thomas could never bully his late father. The air in courtroom 4B of the San Mateo County Superior Court was thick with the perfume of old money and fresh animosity. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all mahogany panels and muted grey carpeting, yet it had become the arena for the deeply personal evisceration of a marriage. Felicia Vale, soon to be she hoped, Felicia Vale once more sat ramrod straight in her cushioned chair. Her hands resting protectively over the pronounced swell of her stomach were the only part of her that betrayed the tremor running through her body. At 32, she still possessed the quiet, bookish beauty that had first caught Thomas Braddock's eye. Thoughtful grey eyes, a cascade of chestnut hair she'd simply pinned back, and a complexion that had never needed the heavy-handed ministrations of the Braddock family's preferred aestheticians. Today, however, that beauty was shadowed by a weariness that went bone deep. She felt less like a person and more like a legal exhibit, the pregnant wife. Across the aisle, Thomas Braddock sat flanked by his lawyer, a shark in a Savile Row suit named Sterling, and his mother, Isabella Braddock. Thomas was the picture of wounded pride, his jaw tight, his brow furrowed in a performance of aggrieved masculinity. He was, Felicia had once thought, devastatingly handsome. Now she saw the weakness in his chin, the petulance in the downturn of his lips. He was a boy playing at being a king, and his mother Isabella was the silent, unyielding power behind the throne. Isabella Braddock was a masterpiece of preserved aristocracy. Her silver hair was coiffed into a helmet of glacial perfection. Her pearls were real, her Chanel suit was vintage, and her disdain was palpable. She hadn't looked at Felicia once, preferring to stare at the judge as if he were a tardy waiter. From the moment Thomas had brought Felicia home to the sprawling Braddock estate in Atherton, Isabella had treated her not as a future daughter-in-law, but as a hostile takeover bid. Felicia wasn't old money. Her father was a history professor, her mother a librarian. To the Braddocks, whose wealth stretched back to the railroad barons, Felicia was a curious little commoner, a temporary amusement for their heir. Mr. Braddock, Judge Albright, said, his voice a low gravel that commanded attention. He was a man in his 60s, with a weary face that had seen every flavor of human depravity. We are here to discuss the division of assets in your divorce proceedings. Let's try to maintain a certain level of decorum. Thomas's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client's emotional state is merely a reflection of the deep betrayal he has suffered. He entered into this marriage in good faith, only to find Felicia's lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Maria Davies, cut him off. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying. The betrayal Mr. Sterling refers to is my client's discovery that the prenuptial agreement Mr. Braddock forced upon her was not only unconscionable, but deliberately misleading. The prenup. The infamous document Isabella had presented to Felicia a week before the wedding. It had been an ambush styled as a casual chat over tea in the solarium. "Just a formality, dear," Isabella had purred, sliding the thick document across the glass table. "A way to keep things tidy. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings down the line." Thomas had backed his mother, of course. "It's just how things are done, Ellie," he'd said, avoiding her eyes. "It doesn't mean anything." It had meant everything. It had stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Felicia would walk away with nothing. Not a penny of the Braddock fortune, no claim to their properties, not even alimony. At the time, blinded by love and a naive belief in their future, she had signed it. Now, with a child on the way, a Braddock heir, the document was a cudgel they were using to beat her into submission. They offered her a one-time payout of $50,000 and a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive it would essentially erase her from their history. The validity of the prenuptial agreement is what we are here to debate. Judge Albright stated, his gaze fixed on Thomas. "But your personal feelings about your wife are for the moment irrelevant." This seemed to be the wrong thing to say. Thomas, who had been simmering, suddenly boiled over. He stood up, knocking his chair back slightly. "Irrelevant," he scoffed, his voice rising. "She is the most relevant mistake I've ever made. I was trapped. My father was ill, he was fond of her for some reason, and I went along with it." He gestured wildly towards Felicia. "She's a gold digger, Your Honor. A clever little parasite who saw a meal ticket and latched on." Maria Davies was on her feet. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." But the judge simply raised a hand, silencing her. He was watching Thomas, his expression unreadable. And Thomas, emboldened by the attention, took a step forward. He locked eyes with Felicia, and the mask of the charming, carefree man she had married fell away completely, revealing the snarling, entitled creature beneath. "Do you know what she did?" He addressed the judge, but his words were daggers aimed at her heart. "She got pregnant on purpose. After I told her we should wait. After I told her things were not working out. She did it to trap me, to try and secure a piece of my family's legacy." Felicia felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie. A vicious, calculated lie. They had been trying for a baby. It was Thomas who had been excited, who had talked about names, who had held her, and whispered dreams of their future family into her hair. That was before his father Arthur Braddock had passed away 2 months ago. Before Isabella had sunk her claws back into her son's soul. Then came the words that would be seared into her memory forever. Thomas's voice dropped, becoming low and guttural, dripping with a contempt so profound it physically hurt her. "She was a mistake," he repeated, pointing at her belly. "And that thing she's carrying is a mistake I refuse to pay for." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Felicia felt it like a physical blow. The baby inside her, their child, kicked as if in protest. Tears welled hot and fast, blurring the cruel face of the man she had loved. She saw Isabella smirk, a flicker of triumphant malice. This was what they wanted. To break her. To humiliate her so completely she would crawl away and accept their scraps. "That is enough." "Mr. Braddock." Judge Albright's voice was no longer weary. It was thunder. He slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing the shattering of Felicia's world. "That is more than enough. You will sit down now." Thomas, looking slightly stunned by his own outburst, sank back into his chair, though his hateful glare remained fixed on Felicia. Judge Albright surveyed the scene, his eyes lingering on Felicia's tear-streaked face. then on Isabella's smug one. He took a deep, steadying breath and squared a stack of papers on his bench. "This court is in recess for 15 minutes, he announced. "However, before we break, a matter has been brought to my attention this morning by the executor of the late Arthur Braddock's estate." At the mention of his father, Thomas sat up straighter. A flicker of something confusion, perhaps apprehension, crossed his face. The judge picked up the worn, leather-bound folder. "It appears that Mr. Arthur Braddock's final will and testament, executed 1 month prior to his death, contains certain stipulations that have a direct and material bearing on the assets currently under discussion in this divorce. With the executor's permission, and given its relevance, I am unsealing it now." He opened the folder. The silence in the courtroom returned, but this time it was different. It was thick with confusion and a dawning electric tension. A will, Arthur's will, had been read weeks ago. It was simple, leaving everything to his only son Thomas, with a generous trust for Isabella. What was this? Felicia wiped her tears, her heart pounding a strange new rhythm. Arthur. Kind, gentle Arthur. He had been the only Braddock who had ever truly seen her, the only one who had ever been on her side. In his final months, as his illness worsened, he would often ask her to sit with him in the garden, away from the oppressive gloom of the mansion and the even more oppressive presence of his wife. They would talk for hours about history, about books, about her dreams for the future. He seemed to understand her in a way Thomas never had. "What is the meaning of this, Your Honor?" Mr. Sterling asked, his composure ruffled for the first time. "A new will. We were not informed, it would seem Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, peering over his spectacles at the document, that no one was." Arthur Braddock was a very thorough man. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room, and began to read. As Judge Albright's voice began to drone through the legalese of the will's preamble, Felicia's mind spun backwards, away from the sterile cruelty of the courtroom to the sun-dappled lawns of the Braddock estate. She remembered the first time she'd met Arthur Braddock. It was 1.5 years ago. Thomas had brought her to the family's annual summer gala, a lavish affair of champagne fountains and string quartets. She'd been terrified a simple librarian's daughter adrift in a sea of couture and condescension. Isabella had introduced her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her tone making Felicia Vale sound like a quaint, unlisted company. Felicia had escaped to the rose garden, overwhelmed when she found a man in a tweed jacket, his back to her, carefully pruning a climbing rose. He turned, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, held a warmth that was entirely absent from the main party. This was Arthur Braddock. "Ah, you've found my hiding spot," he'd said with a gentle smile. "Don't worry, I won't tell if you don't." They talked for nearly an hour. He didn't ask about her family's money or connections. He asked what she was reading. He asked about her work at the San Francisco Public Library, his face lighting up when she described her passion for historical archives. He spoke of his own love for history, a passion he lamented his son did not share. "Thomas sees history as a list of assets acquired," Arthur had said, with a sad, knowing sigh. "He sees the names Rockefeller, Carnegie, Braddock. But he doesn't understand the stories, the humanity." In that single conversation, Arthur had shown her more genuine interest and kindness than Isabella had in 6 months of strained dinners. He saw her not as an attachment to his son, but as a person. Over the next year, he became her quiet ally in the gilded cage of the Braddock family. While Isabella laid subtle traps and Thomas grew more distant under his mother's influence, Arthur would seek Felicia out. He'd leave a rare first edition book on her bedside table or invite her to walk the grounds, sharing stories of the family that were not about wealth, but about love, loss, and folly. He was already ill then, a creeping lung disease that stole his breath but never his sharp intellect. As his condition worsened, the dynamic in the house shifted. Isabella became more controlling, treating her husband's illness as an inconvenience and tightening her grip on Thomas. The pregnancy had been a brief, shining moment of hope. Thomas had been ecstatic at first. It was his idea, a way to, as he'd put it, finally start our own family away from all the pressure. They'd celebrated with a trip to Big Sur, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the estate. He had put his hands on her still flat stomach and spoken of a future that felt real and full of love. The moment they returned, Isabella shattered it. Felicia overheard the argument from the top of the grand staircase. A baby. Isabella's voice was like ice. "Now, Thomas, you are an imbecile. You have no idea what you've done." "Mother, it's my child. Our child. I love Ellie." "Love," she'd scoffed. "You are infatuated with a librarian, Thomas, a nobody. And now she has tethered herself to our legacy with the oldest trick in the book. Do you think for 1 second she wasn't planning this? To tie you down, to make herself indispensable." The poison took root quickly. Thomas began to pull away. He started spending more time at the office, coming home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and another woman's perfume. The excuses were flimsy, the apologies hollow. He grew short-tempered, echoing his mother's criticisms. He'd comment on Felicia's clothes, her friends, her lack of ambition. Then Arthur's health took a steep decline. In his last weeks, he was confined to his bed. The house was somber and quiet. Isabella managed his care with ruthless efficiency, keeping visitors to a minimum. But Arthur would still ask for Felicia. One afternoon, just a month before he died, he beckoned her close. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were lucid. "Felicia," he rasped, taking her hand. His own was frail, all paper-thin skin and bone. "Don't let them break you. You have more strength than any of them." He'd looked pointedly at her stomach. "And you have a responsibility to that child, a responsibility to be strong." He'd made her promise. She hadn't understood the full weight of his words then. 2 weeks later, he summoned his personal attorney, a man Felicia had never met, to the house. Isabella had been furious, trying to insist that the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, be present. Arthur, with a surprising burst of strength, had refused. "This is a private matter, Isabella," he'd said. The meeting had lasted for 3 hours. The next day Arthur seemed more at peace. He passed away in his sleep a month later. The first reading of the will had been exactly what everyone expected. A simple document leaving Braddock Enterprises and the bulk of the estate to Thomas. Isabella was granted a lifelong right to live in the family mansion and a generous stipend from a separate trust. It was so straightforward that Thomas had smirked a look of vindicated relief on his face. With his father gone, the final obstacle to his absolute inheritance and Isabella's absolute influence was removed. 2 days after that, Thomas had asked for a divorce. The words were cold, rehearsed. He'd said the marriage was a mistake, that he'd been pressured by his father's failing health. He presented it as a clean break, a return to the natural order of things. When Felicia, heartbroken and 7 months pregnant, had refused to be discarded so easily, he had turned vicious. The battle over the prenup began. And now here they were. A sharp intake of breath from Mr. Sterling snapped Felicia back to the present. Judge Albright had finished with the preliminary sections of the will. His eyes scanned the room before continuing. "We now come to Article 4. The judge said, his voice dropping slightly, drawing every ounce of attention in the room. "Regarding the disposition of my primary asset, my controlling interest in Braddock Enterprises Incorporated." Thomas leaned forward, a smug look returning to his face. This was it, the confirmation of his kingdom. "I, Arthur Braddock," the judge read his voice, clear and deliberate, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare the following. My son Thomas Braddock has in recent months shown a lamentable lack of judgment and a character ill-suited to the stewardship of the company my grandfather built." A jolt went through the room. Thomas's face went from smug to slack-jawed shock. Isabella's carefully constructed composure cracked her mouth, falling open slightly. What Thomas whispered the word stolen by the cavernous room. The judge continued, his voice unwavering. "He has proven himself to be easily manipulated and has forgotten the most fundamental principle of our family's success, that our name is built on integrity, not just on assets. Therefore, I cannot in good conscience deliver the future of Braddock Enterprises into his hands." "This is insane," Sterling blurted out, rising to his feet. "Your Honor, my client's father was clearly not of sound mind. He was heavily medicated. He was certified of sound mind by 2 independent physicians the day this will was signed, Mr. Sterling. Their affidavits are attached," Judge Albright said coolly, not even looking up. "Now sit down." Sterling sank back into his chair, his face pale. The judge's eyes found Felicia's across the room. She held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. He went on. "Therefore, I hereby bequeath my entire controlling share of Braddock Enterprises, representing 51% of the voting stock, not to my son, but to a trust. This trust shall be known as the Arthur Vale Braddock Legacy Trust." Vale. He had used her maiden name. A low guttural sound escaped Isabella's throat. The judge continued reading the clause that would change everything. "The sole beneficiary of this trust is to be my first-born grandchild, the child currently carried by my daughter-in-law, Felicia Vale Braddock." The courtroom devolved into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Thomas looked as if he'd been struck by lightning, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He stared at Felicia's belly, not with contempt, but with a dawning, horrified awe. That mistake was now the majority shareholder of his entire inheritance. But Arthur Braddock wasn't finished. The final killing blow was yet to come. Judge Albright looked up from the document, his gaze passing over Thomas and Isabella, before settling once more on Felicia. He read the last sentence of the article, his voice ringing with a profound posthumous finality. "The sole executor and trustee of this trust, vested with absolute and unconditional authority over all voting rights, board appointments, and financial decisions of Braddock Enterprises, until the beneficiary reaches the age of 25, shall be the child's mother, and my trusted daughter-in-law, Felicia Vale Braddock." For a long moment, the world stopped. The frantic whispers died. The rustling of papers ceased. The only sound in courtroom 4B was the frantic, trapped beat of Felicia's own heart. She stared at Judge Albright, certain she had misheard, that the grief and stress had finally caused her to hallucinate. Sole executor and trustee. Absolute and unconditional authority. The words didn't compute. They were abstract alien concepts that didn't belong to her. Felicia Vale, the librarian, the spurned wife, the humiliated mother-to-be. Then the spell broke. A strangled cry tore from Isabella Braddock's throat. It was a sound of pure, undiluted fury, the cry of a queen who has just watched her castle crumble into dust. "No, it's a lie, a forgery!" she shrieked, lurching to her feet. Her mask of aristocratic control was gone, replaced by a visage of raw, twitching rage. That woman, that scheming little harlot, she manipulated him. She poisoned my husband against his own family. Mr. Sterling, his face the color of ash, tried to restrain her, whispering urgently, "Isabella not here. Control yourself." But she was beyond control. She pointed a trembling, diamond-clad finger at Felicia. This was your plan all along. You seduced a dying old man, twisted his mind." "Mrs. Braddock." Judge Albright's voice cracked like a whip. "You are on the verge of being held in contempt. Another outburst like that, and you will be removed by the bailiff." Isabella snapped her mouth shut, but her chest heaved, and her eyes fixed on Felicia promised retribution. Thomas was eerily silent. He sat frozen, his body rigid, his eyes wide and vacant. He was staring at the polished table in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing his entire world, the one he had been promised from birth, vanish before his eyes. The kingdom he was meant to inherit, the power he was meant to wield, had just been handed lock, stock, and barrel to the woman he had publicly disavowed, and the unborn child he had branded a mistake. Felicia's lawyer, Maria Davies, leaned over her, voice a low, steady murmur in Felicia's ear. "Felicia, did you hear that? Do you understand what this means?" Felicia could only shake her head slowly, her mind a whirlwind of shock. She looked from Thomas's shattered expression to Isabella's murderous glare. She felt a kick, a strong, solid thump from within, a reminder of the tiny, unknowing beneficiary at the center of this cataclysm. Judge Albright, seemingly unfazed by the eruption, continued as if reading a grocery list. "The will goes on to state," he said, his voice cutting through the residual tension, "that Thomas Braddock is to be granted a salaried position as President of Operations, reporting directly to the Board of Directors. A board that the new trustee," he paused, looking directly at Felicia, "has the sole authority to appoint or dismiss." The implication was brutally clear. Thomas was no longer the heir apparent. He was an employee who could be fired. By her. Furthermore, the judge added, "The will stipulates that Thomas Braddock and Isabella Braddock are permitted to maintain residence in the Atherton family home, but only with the express ongoing permission of the trustee. The deed and title of the property are to be transferred to the Arthur Vale Braddock Legacy Trust." They were tenants in their own home. Their right to live there was now entirely at Felicia's discretion. The finality of it was absolute. Arthur hadn't just disinherited his son. He had orchestrated a complete coup d'etat from beyond the grave. He had seen the cruelty, the weakness, the greed, and he had built a fortress to protect his grandchild and the woman he believed could safeguard his legacy. He hadn't just given Felicia a shield. He had given her a sword, an arsenal, an entire kingdom. The will Judge Albright concluded, closing the leather folder with a soft thud, "is accompanied by a signed and notarized letter from Arthur Braddock detailing his reasons. It explains his concerns over his son's profligate spending, his susceptibility to his mother's corrosive influence, and his cruel and dishonorable treatment of his pregnant wife. The letter states, and I quote, "I have observed Felicia for 2 years. She possesses an integrity my son sorely lacks. She is intelligent, compassionate, and her loyalty is not to money but to family. I do not give her this power to punish my son, but to protect my grandchild. I trust her to do what is right." The judge looked at Thomas. "The letter also expresses hope, Mr. Braddock, that this drastic but necessary action will provide you with an opportunity to rediscover the man you were meant to be, not the man your mother wants you to be." That last line was a dagger meant for Isabella, and it hit its mark. She flinched as if struck. Judge Albright removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Given these revelations," he stated, his voice returning to its official, dispassionate tone, "the financial landscape of this divorce has been fundamentally altered. The prenuptial agreement is now entirely moot, as the primary assets Mr. Braddock believed were his to protect are in fact not his. The $50,000 settlement offered to Mrs. Braddock is, to put it mildly, insufficient." He looked at Felicia, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something almost like a smile in his tired eyes. "In fact, Mrs. Braddock is now, for all intents and purposes, the single most powerful financial entity in this room. The assets belong to the trust she controls." He turned to the stunned lawyers. "I am dissolving these proceedings for today. I suggest you all go home, absorb the contents of this will, and reschedule when you have a more realistic grasp of your clients' respective situations. Mr. Sterling," he added pointedly, "you may want to advise your client that his wife's mistake now controls his salary, his home, and his future. A bit of humility might be in order." With a final sharp rap of the gavel, he declared, "Court is adjourned." The judge rose and swept out of the room, leaving a vortex of stunned silence in his wake. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, chaos erupted. Reporters who had been lurking in the gallery rushed towards the doors. Sterling was frantically trying to speak to Thomas, who was still catatonic. Maria Davies was patting Felicia's shoulder, her face a mixture of shock and elation. Felicia slowly got to her feet, her legs unsteady. She felt dizzy, disconnected from her own body. Isabella was the first to move towards her, her face a terrifying mask of fury. She stalked across the aisle, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "You will not get away with this," Isabella hissed, her voice low and venomous, close enough for Felicia to smell her cloyingly expensive perfume. "I will fight this. I will prove you are an unfit mother. I will drag your name through so much mud you'll drown in it. That baby will never see a penny." Before Felicia could react, a figure stepped between them. It was Thomas. His face was ashen, his eyes wild with a desperate, frantic energy. He looked from his mother to Felicia, then back again. "Mother, stop," he said, his voice hoarse. "Just stop." He then turned to Felicia. The contempt was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading panic. The man who not 20 minutes ago had called her and their child a mistake now looked at her as if she were a lifeline. "Ellie," he began, his voice cracking. He even reached a hand out as if to touch her arm before letting it fall. "Ellie, I didn't mean it. You have to believe me. I was angry. I was pressured." His eyes flickered towards his mother. "We can fix this, you and me. We can stop the divorce. We can raise the baby together, in our house." The audacity of it was breathtaking. The whiplash of his transformation from tyrant to supplicant was so sudden it was nauseating. He wasn't apologizing for the cruelty. He was trying to reverse a transaction that had gone horribly wrong for him. He didn't see a wife he had wounded. He saw the new CEO of his life. Felicia looked at his desperate, pleading face. She looked at Isabella, who was watching them with narrowed, calculating eyes, her mind already plotting new strategies. And she felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not even anger anymore. Just a profound, chilling emptiness where her love for him used to be. She looked at his outstretched, trembling hand. Then she looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and steady for the first time that day. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving her husband and his mother standing in the ruins of their fallen kingdom. Her lawyer Maria rushed to her side, and together they walked out of the courtroom. Not towards a miserable, uncertain future, but towards an empire Felicia had never asked for, but now, by the grace of a good man's final act, commanded. The days that followed the courtroom bombshell were a blur of surreal adjustments. Felicia didn't return to the small rented apartment she had secured as a refuge from her marriage. Maria Davies had insisted it wasn't secure enough. "You're not just a private citizen anymore, Felicia," she'd said, her tone urgent. "You are the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. There are protocols now." And so Felicia found herself in a gilded prison of a different sort, a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons paid for by the Arthur Vale Braddock Legacy Trust, with a round-the-clock security detail stationed in the hallway, lawyers, trust officers, and financial advisors. Men and women with sharp suits and even sharper minds. All remnants of Arthur's loyal inner circle paraded through her living room. They presented her with binders thick with financial reports, organizational charts, and legal obligations. They used terms like fiduciary duty, hostile takeover defenses, and quarterly earnings projections. At first, it was overwhelmingly intimidating. She was Felicia Vale, who found comfort in the Dewey Decimal System, not the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But as they spoke, she listened. She asked questions, simple ones at first, then more complex ones. And she discovered something surprising. The logic of it, the intricate web of cause and effect, wasn't so different from tracing historical events or archival records. It was a story just told in the language of numbers. More importantly, she was fueled by a powerful clarifying force, the memory of Arthur's words, "I trust her to do what is right," and the visceral, soul-crushing memory of Thomas's "that thing she's carrying is a mistake." One was a sacred trust, the other a declaration of war. She would honor the former by prevailing in the latter. Her phone rang incessantly. The calls were from Thomas. He left dozens of voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. They were a pathetic symphony of panicked apologies and self-serving promises. "Ellie, baby, please pick up. I'm so sorry. I've been such a fool. My mother, she gets in my head. But that's over now, I swear. I was just looking at the crib we ordered. Remember the one from that little shop in Carmel? It's all about us, Ellie. You, me, and our little boy. Or girl. It's all that matters. I told Sterling to fire his legal team. We don't need lawyers. We're a family. Just come home. Please, just come home, and we can figure this all out." She never answered. She never listened to a single message, twice. It was the desperate pleading of a man who had lost his wallet, not a husband who had broken his wife's heart. Isabella, for her part, had gone to ground. But it was a tactical silence, not a surrender. Maria's legal team reported that Isabella had hired a new, notoriously aggressive law firm, specializing in contesting wills. They were digging, searching for any doctor who would testify to Arthur's incompetence, any nurse who would claim Felicia had restricted access to him, any scrap of dirt they could find, to paint her as a manipulative usurper. A week after the hearing, Felicia knew she couldn't stay in the hotel forever. She had to make a move. The trust owned the Braddock mansion. It was her house now. More importantly, it was her child's house. Arthur had not intended for his grandchild to be raised in exile. So she made a decision. She called Maria. "I'm going home," she said, her voice firm. Felicia is that wise. It's not about wisdom, Maria. It's about a clear message. The Queen is not in hiding. The return was as dramatic as she had intended. She didn't sneak in the back door. She arrived in a black town car, arranged by the trust, which swept up the long gravel driveway to the imposing facade of the Atherton mansion. As she stepped out of the car, the heavy front doors opened. Thomas stood there, his face a mixture of hope and terror. He had clearly been watching for her. He was dressed down in a cashmere sweater, an attempt to look soft, approachable. "Ellie." He breathed a relieved smile, touching his lips. "You're home." "I am," Felicia said, her tone cool and level. She walked past him into the cavernous marble-floored foyer. The air was still and smelled of lemon polish and lilies, just as it always had. "I've asked a moving company to clear out my old things from the guest wing. They will be delivering my new furniture for the nursery this afternoon." Thomas's smile faltered. "Of course, anything you want. I had Mrs. Albright air out the master suite for you. For us." Felicia stopped and turned to him. "Let's be very clear, Thomas. I am not here to reconcile. I am here because this is my home now. It belongs to the trust that I command. You and your mother are living here at my discretion." The words hung in the air, cold and hard. The color drained from Thomas's face. "My legal team," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "will be drawing up a tenancy at will agreement for you and Isabella. It will stipulate the terms of your continued residence. Furthermore, I am calling a board meeting for Braddock Enterprises for Monday morning. As president of operations, your attendance will be required. You'll be expected to present a full report on the company's current standing." She was no longer his wife. She was his landlord and his boss. The reality of it slammed into him, and his composure finally shattered. "Felicia, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Don't do this. Don't be like this. This isn't you. You're not this cold." "You're right," she said, looking him straight in the eye. "The woman I was would have forgiven you. She would have believed your lies and let you hurt her again. But you and your mother killed that woman. You stood in a court of law, and you killed her. So you'll have to get used to the woman who is left." Just then a sharp, imperious voice echoed from the top of the grand staircase. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Isabella stood there, wrapped in a silk dressing gown, her face a thunderous mask. Felicia didn't even grant her a full glance. "Hello, Isabella," she said, her voice carrying easily in the grand space. "I'm home. I trust your new lawyers have explained the situation to you. You're a guest here. Try not to forget it." She turned and began to walk towards the east wing, where Arthur's private study was located. It had been her sanctuary with him, and it would now be her command center. "You will regret this," Isabella shrieked from the landing. "I will see you on the street." Felicia paused, her back still to them. "No, you won't," she said without turning around. "You will see me in the boardroom, Monday at 9 a.m. Don't be late." And with that, she walked away, leaving mother and son standing in the opulent foyer of a house that was no longer theirs, silenced by the quiet, unshakable authority of the woman they had tried and failed to destroy. The following months were a masterclass in trench warfare fought not with bullets, but with board appointments and legal briefs. Felicia, now 8 and then 9 months pregnant, moved not with the timid uncertainty of a librarian, but with the deliberate, focused strategy of a general. Arthur's study became her war room. Its rich, leather-bound books on military history and corporate biography now seemed less like a collection and more like a curated library of tactics left for her by a brilliant mentor. Her first move was the board meeting. She walked into the Braddock Enterprises boardroom, a long, intimidating chamber dominated by a colossal mahogany table and portraits of stern-faced Braddock men, and every head turned. The existing board members, all cronies of Thomas and Isabella, looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and thinly veiled contempt. Thomas sat at the head of the table, a place he had occupied for less than 3 months. Felicia, guided by Maria, and the Trust's chief counsel, took the seat directly opposite him. She didn't claim his chair. She created a new center of power. She let Thomas run through his report, a rambling, jargon-filled presentation clearly designed to intimidate and confuse her. When he finished, he looked at her, a challenge in his eyes. Felicia didn't respond directly to his report. Instead, she introduced the Trust's counsel, who then calmly and methodically laid out the legal reality of the new ownership structure. Then Felicia spoke. "Thank you, Thomas, for that overview," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "In my capacity as trustee, my primary duty is to ensure the long-term health and integrity of this company for the sole beneficiary. To that end, I have spent the last week reviewing the company's performance, its leadership, and its vision, and I have found it lacking." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Effective immediately, I am exercising my authority as trustee to reconstitute the board of directors. Mr. Henderson, Ms. Albright, Mr. Chen," she said, naming 3 of Isabella's oldest and most loyal allies. "Your positions on this board are terminated. Thank you for your service." The 3 of them stared aghast. "You can't do that," one of them sputtered. "She can, and she has," the Trust's lawyer interjected smoothly. Felicia continued, her gaze sweeping the table. "In their place, I am appointing 3 new members. First, Ms. Maria Davies, whose legal expertise will be invaluable. Second, Mr. Alistair Finch." She named Arthur's longtime, fiercely loyal financial advisor, a man Isabella had forced into retirement. And third, Dr. Lena Petrova, a leading expert in sustainable business ethics from Stanford University. Arthur Braddock often spoke of creating a legacy, not just a profit margin. We will honor that vision. It was a coup, clean, swift, and utterly devastating. She had decapitated Isabella's power base within the company in less than 5 minutes. Thomas sat impotent, watching his allies pack their briefcases in stunned silence. He was still president, but he was now a president who answered to a board that was loyal to her. Life in the mansion was a silent, cold war. Felicia took over the master wing, while Thomas and Isabella were confined to the guest suites. They shared the same roof, passed each other in the long hallways like ghosts, and ate meals at different times to avoid contact. Isabella's attempts at psychological warfare, leaving old happy photos of her and Thomas out making loud, pitying phone calls about poor, confused Felicia, were met with a wall of serene, impenetrable silence. Thomas, meanwhile, swung wildly between pathetic attempts at reconciliation and sullen resentment. He'd leave a single rose on her desk one day, and the next he'd make a sarcastic comment about her playing CEO at the dinner table. Felicia ignored it all. Her focus was singular, the baby and the business. She found an unexpected strength in the routine. She'd wake early, walk the gardens as she had with Arthur, and then spend hours with Alistair Finch, the reappointed advisor. He would patiently walk her through balance sheets and investment portfolios, marveling at her quick grasp of complex ideas. "Your father-in-law was right about you," he said one afternoon. "You have a formidable mind, Mrs. Braddock. You see the whole chessboard." The one front where Isabella believed she could still win was the legal challenge to the will. Her lawyers filed motion after motion, claiming undue influence and testamentary incapacity. They deposed nurses, gardeners, and cooks, searching for any hint that Felicia had manipulated a dying man. The case was set to be heard by Judge Albright once again. Isabella was confident. She believed, found a star witness, a disgruntled former nurse, whom Isabella had paid handsomely to testify that Felicia had constantly bad-mouthed Thomas and Isabella to Arthur, poisoning his mind in his final days. The day before the hearing, Felicia was in the nursery putting the finishing touches on the room. It was painted a soft, gentle yellow, with a mural of a forest scene on one wall. As she stood there, her hands on her huge belly, feeling the strong, steady kicks of her child, she felt a profound sense of peace. She was ready for whatever came next. That evening, a courier delivered a small sealed package to her. It was from Arthur's personal attorney, the executor of the estate. The accompanying note was brief. "Arthur asked me to give this to you if Isabella ever formally contested the will. He called it insurance." Felicia's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was not a document, but a small, solid-state audio recorder and a single key. Confused, she pressed play. The voice that filled the silent room was Arthur's. It was weak, raspy, clearly recorded in his last weeks, but it was unmistakably him. "If you are hearing this, Felicia," the recording began, "it means Isabella is trying to undo my final wishes. I am not surprised. Her greed has always been her most defining trait. I want you and the court to know the truth." Arthur's recorded voice then detailed with painful clarity Isabella's emotional cruelty throughout their marriage, her constant manipulation of their son, and her open contempt for Felicia. He spoke of how Isabella had tried to bar Felicia from his room, how she had dismissed his doctors and tried to bring in her own specialists who would declare him incompetent. "But the most important evidence," Arthur's voice continued, "is not my words, but hers. Last week, she did not know I had my lawyer install a small recording device in this room, activated by voice. She came in, believing me to be asleep to speak with Thomas. They thought they were alone. The recording is on this device. The key is to my old safe in the study. The evidence inside will corroborate everything." Felicia's blood ran cold. She stopped the recording, her heart pounding. She took the small antique key, went to the study, and opened the safe she never knew existed, hidden behind a false panel of books. Inside was a folder. It contained copies of emails between Isabella and a private investigator she had hired to dig up dirt on Felicia a year ago. It contained financial records showing large payments to the disgruntled nurse. And it contained a second audio recorder. With a deep breath, she pressed play. This time the voices were clearer. It was Isabella and Thomas in Arthur's room, thinking he was sedated and unconscious. Isabella's voice was sharp, cutting. "You have to divorce her the moment he's gone, Thomas. Not a day later. Offer her a pittance. Humiliate her. Make her crawl back to whatever hovel she came from. We cannot have that common bloodline infecting this family." Then Thomas's voice, weak and compliant. "And the baby? What do I do about the baby?" "The baby is a non-issue," Isabella had replied coldly. "We'll claim she trapped you. We'll claim it might not even be yours. We will drag her through a custody battle that will break her. In the end, she'll give it all up just to have peace. The Braddock legacy will remain pure. Your father in his senile state may be fond of her, but we will protect our family from his sentimentality." Felicia sank into a chair, the audio recorder slipping from her fingers. It wasn't just a conspiracy. It was a confession. They had laid out their entire vicious plan in the presence of the very man whose legacy they sought to protect. She now held more than just a defense. She held a weapon of annihilation. The hearing was tomorrow, and she knew exactly what she was going to do. The morning of the hearing was grey and overcast. Isabella Braddock arrived looking imperious and confident, her paid star witness, Nurse Brenda, trailing in her wake. Thomas followed, looking haggard, a man caught in an inescapable vice. Felicia entered last, calm and composed, carrying a simple leather briefcase. Isabella's lawyer, Fletcher, called his witness. Nurse Brenda took the stand and delivered a tearful, practiced performance, painting Felicia as a cunning manipulator who had poisoned a dying, vulnerable Arthur against his loving family. She would whisper insults about Mrs. Braddock and Thomas for hours, the nurse claimed, dabbing a fake tear. She twisted his every thought. It was heartbreaking. When it was Maria Davies's turn, she approached the stand with lethal calm. "Nurse Brenda," she began, "aside from your salary, were you paid any other amounts by Isabella Braddock? Specifically, a sum of $250,000 transferred to an offshore account 2 days after Arthur Braddock's death." The nurse's face went white. Fletcher shot to his feet, shouting objections, but Judge Albright overruled him instantly. "Answer the question, Nurse Brenda." The witness stammered, her lies collapsing under the weight of a single damning question. But this was only the opening salvo. At a nod from Maria, Felicia stood the proud swell of her pregnancy, a silent testament to everything at stake. "Your Honor," Felicia said, her voice ringing with newfound strength, "I would like to present new evidence that will clarify the true nature of the influence surrounding Arthur Braddock in his final days." She opened her briefcase and removed a small audio recorder. "This is a recording made by my father-in-law himself. He left it for me in the event of this exact scenario." She pressed play. Arthur's weak, rasping voice filled the stunned courtroom. He spoke of his faith in Felicia's character and his deep disappointment in his son and wife. A visible shockwave went through the room when he mentioned a second recording, one he had secretly made, of Isabella and Thomas. Isabella's face contorted a mask of dawning horror. "And now," Felicia said, her voice cold as steel, as she held up the second device, the conversation Arthur spoke of, recorded in his room when they believed he was unconscious. She pressed play again. The courtroom was plunged into a chilling silence, broken only by the recorded voices of mother and son plotting Felicia's destruction. Isabella's voice, crisp and cruel. "You have to divorce her the moment he's gone. Humiliate her. Make her crawl. We cannot have that common bloodline infecting this family." Then Thomas, weak and complicit. "And the baby? What do I do about the baby?" And the final monstrous words from Isabella. "The baby is a non-issue. We'll claim it might not even be yours. We will drag her through a custody battle that will break her." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute and condemning. Isabella was frozen in her chair, her face a grotesque tableau of public exposure and private ruin. Thomas had buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. His lawyer sat down, utterly defeated. Judge Albright stared at Isabella, his face a mask of cold fury. "Mrs. Braddock," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "what you have just heard in your own words is a monstrous conspiracy to commit perjury and destroy an innocent woman. And you," he said, turning his glare on Thomas, "your cowardice is contemptible." He slammed his gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "The challenge to this will is dismissed with extreme prejudice. I am fining Mrs. Isabella Braddock $500,000 for malicious prosecution. And I am forwarding this audio evidence to the district attorney's office for investigation into potential criminal charges." His expression softened only when he looked at Felicia. "Mrs. Braddock, you have endured a trial by fire and proven your father-in-law's faith in you was not misplaced. You are free." It was over. Complete victory. As the court adjourned, Thomas finally lifted his head, his face ravaged by tears. He looked at Felicia, his eyes a bottomless well of self-loathing, knowing no words could ever bridge the chasm he had created. Felicia met his gaze not with triumph, but with a quiet, somber finality. She gave a single nod, an acknowledgement of the tragedy he had authored, then turned and walked out of the courtroom without a backward glance. 2 weeks later, Felicia gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him Arthur. The day she brought him home, the mansion felt different. Isabella was gone, having retreated to await the results of the DA's investigation. Thomas remained a ghost in the guest wing. Felicia stood in the grand foyer, holding her tiny son. She looked up at the portrait of the first Arthur Braddock, then at the empty, faded space on the wall where Isabella's portrait used to hang. The house was no longer a cage or a battlefield. It was a sanctuary. It was home. Her son Arthur Vale Braddock cooed in his sleep, his tiny hand wrapped securely around her finger. He was not a mistake. He was a legacy. And she was his guardian. The past was a story of pain, but the future was hers to write. From courtroom humiliation to the head of an empire, Felicia Braddock's journey is a breathtaking saga of karmic justice. A husband's cruelty sparked his own downfall, but a father's final act of love provided the ultimate checkmate. She didn't just win her freedom, she inherited a fortune and proved that true power comes from character, not just a name. Michelle Parker never thought her life could shatter so quickly. One day she was the glowing wife of a millionaire, admired for her poise and kindness. The next, she found herself alone, pregnant, and parked in a dimly lit supermarket lot, desperately trying to sleep behind the steering wheel of her old sedan. How did it come to this? Whispers of betrayal and the sting of infidelity pushed her out of the mansion she called home. And yet fate had only begun unveiling its secrets. A mysterious phone call and a clandestine invitation would soon change the course of Michelle's life forever. Michelle Harris grew up in the modest suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri. Her upbringing was comfortable but never luxurious. Her father, Robert Harris, worked as a history teacher at a local high school, while her mother, June, managed a small daycare from their home. From a young age, Michelle learned the value of caring for others. Summers found her elbow-deep in chores at her mother's daycare, playing games with toddlers and soothing, teary-eyed babies. In a household that constantly bustled with children's laughter, she never once imagined herself living a grand, extravagant life. Yet, as Michelle finished her degree in marketing at Washington University in St. Louis, she dreamed of using her talents to climb the corporate ladder. She spent hours in the library, devouring marketing case studies and meticulously crafting plans for small local businesses in her free time. The side gigs paid little, but they earned her a reputation for creativity and diligence. It was during an off-site training session for a startup company that Michelle met Adrian Parker. Adrian, tall, charismatic, and with eyes that seemed to promise adventure, walked into the conference room and stole her breath away. He was there to speak about business strategy, brand influence, and how to capture investors' attention. At only 34, Adrian was already a millionaire, the CEO of an investment firm called Parker Grant Holdings, known for backing innovative tech projects. Rumor had it he'd once pitched a joint venture to none other than Elon Musk, but the details were hush-hush. By the time he walked off the stage that day, Michelle couldn't get him out of her mind. Their first conversation took place by the snack table, a relatively unassuming place for a budding romance. She was fussing with the coffee machine. He was trying to decide between a chocolate-filled croissant or a plain one. They laughed at their mutual indecision, an inconsequential moment that blossomed into something extraordinary. Within minutes, Michelle felt as if she'd known him her entire life. Adrian was witty, engaging, and genuinely intrigued by her ideas. He jotted down her contact on a notepad and casually said, "I have a feeling we'll meet again," before sliding it into his suit pocket. Adrian called her 3 days later. They arranged a date at a rooftop bar in the central West End. It was there, beneath the glow of string lights and amidst soft jazz music, that Michelle discovered Adrian had an old soul. He loved big band tunes and had a penchant for surprising his companions with thoughtful gifts. That night he gave her a first-edition marketing book by David Ogilvy, a gesture that left her speechless. After hours of conversation, their connection felt palpably real, built on shared passions, insatiable curiosity, and the electricity of new love. Their relationship skyrocketed from that first date. Within 6 months, Adrian proposed on a snowy evening while they visited Chicago for a business trip. He organized a fancy dinner at the Signature Room on the 95th floor, orchestrating an entire ensemble of violinists to serenade them during dessert. The ring he offered her was modest by millionaire standards, but precious in its simple elegance, a solitaire diamond that sparkled with promise. Michelle tearfully accepted, her heart dancing with excitement at the thought of forever. When they married, everything felt like a fairy tale. The wedding took place on the lush grounds of a vineyard near Napa Valley. Michelle wore a flowing ivory gown, while Adrian sported a crisp black tuxedo. They exchanged vows under a floral arch, with the golden California sun dipping behind them, as if nature itself blessed their union. Close friends and family clinked glasses in celebration, and the newlyweds waltzed into a future that seemed nothing short of perfect. Yet lurking beneath the veneer of wealth and romance was a truth neither suspected. Money can mend many problems, but it can also create new ones. Over the next 2 years, Adrian's fortune grew exponentially. Parker Grant Holdings financed a series of lucrative ventures, placing him in the spotlight of major business publications. Their mansion in St. Louis rivaled homes in Beverly Hills, featuring a marble foyer, a crystal chandelier imported from Italy, and an expansive backyard, complete with a lagoon-style pool. Despite the glamour, Michelle remained grounded. She continued her marketing work, shifting from small gigs to philanthropic branding projects, frequently collaborating with charities like the American Cancer Society. She wanted her own achievements separate from Adrian's fortune. She believed in a partnership of equals, even if her bank account was dwarfed by his. The seeds of trouble were sown quietly. Adrian, once doting and attentive, began missing dinners and phone calls. He brushed off Michelle's concerns with hurried excuses: investors in town, urgent meeting, emergency board vote. While his business soared, his personal life with Michelle began to falter. She would wait in their expansive living room, nerves taut, phone in hand, as the clock neared midnight, just hoping for a text or call from her husband. Some nights she'd lie awake, staring at the empty space in their bed, wondering if success had turned Adrian into a man she hardly knew. Pregnancy was not part of the original plan, at least not yet. They'd discussed having children, but wanted a more stable personal routine first. Fate had a different intention. The day Michelle discovered she was pregnant, her heart fluttered between excitement and fear. She imagined telling Adrian over a romantic dinner, or maybe surprising him with a small box containing baby shoes. But that night, he came home in a foul mood, weighed down by stress and reeking of expensive whiskey. She tried to give him a back rub, sensing his tension, but he only snapped at her. "I need sleep, Michelle," he barked. "I've got a flight to New York at dawn." She swallowed her hurt and slipped into bed without telling him the news. Days passed before she finally told him. Instead of hugging her and dancing around the living room, as she hoped, he wore a conflicted expression. "Are you sure you want to keep it now?" he asked, his voice flat. Michelle felt a chill. She was stunned he'd even question it. In the weeks that followed, Adrian's schedule became more erratic. He left earlier, came home later if he came home at all. Her pregnancy cravings and morning sickness were overshadowed by an unshakable dread. She felt invisible, an afterthought in his life. Whenever she tried to address it, he offered lavish gifts, designer handbags, diamond bracelets, attempting to placate her with tokens of wealth instead of genuine attention. But Michelle wasn't a fool. She knew the signs of a relationship in peril. Whispers of a rumored affair reached her ears through the very social circles she'd once navigated with ease. Women at charity events shot her pitying glances. Men who admired her philanthropic zeal seemed hesitant to speak openly about the rumors, but the look in their eyes said enough. Something was wrong. One friend, Kelly Reyes, a public relations expert Michelle had worked with, pulled her aside after a charity gala for UNICEF. She awkwardly shifted her gaze and said, "Michelle, I hate to be the one to say it, but I've heard chatter that Adrian's been spotted in questionable circumstances. It might be wise to talk to him." Michelle's lips quivered. She thanked Kelly for her concern. Yet that night, she confronted Adrian the moment he stepped into their marble foyer, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silent house. He shook his head in denial, feigning outrage. "You actually believe gossip over your own husband?" he spat, tossing his blazer onto a couch. She tried to read his eyes to find some trace of regret or heartbreak at her accusation. Instead, she saw only anger and something else. Fear. "You're the one who hasn't been around," Michelle retorted, her voice catching. "How am I supposed to trust you when you're never here?" The fight escalated. Adrian stormed out, leaving Michelle sobbing quietly in the living room. The proof arrived in the cruelest way possible, through paparazzi photos plastered on a gossip site. A tipster had snapped pictures of Adrian stepping out of a luxury hotel in New York, arm in arm, with a stunning brunette in a form-fitting black dress. The expression on his face was unmistakably affectionate as he escorted the woman into a waiting limousine. Later, more photos emerged of them dining at a Michelin-starred restaurant, the two of them looking every bit like a glamorous power couple. Michelle discovered these pictures late at night while scrolling through her phone, half hoping to find some sign of Adrian's whereabouts. Instead, her heart shattered. The ache in her chest was almost unbearable. She stared at her reflection in the glossy marble floor of the bathroom, her hands trembling as she tried not to sink into despair. For 2 nights, she kept the revelation to herself. She felt paralyzed, her mind alternating between heartbreak and an irrational hope that this was all some misunderstanding. On the 3rd night, Adrian arrived home, smelling of bourbon and fresh cologne. Michelle confronted him, phone in hand, pictures on the screen. He didn't deny it. Didn't even try. Instead, he stared her down. His face twisted in annoyance. "So what if I'm seeing someone else?" he said, bitterness dripping from his voice. "You've been distant. All you do is talk about the baby." The cruelty in his words felt like a dagger to her soul. "You promised me forever," she croaked, tears welling in her eyes. She could barely stand upright as her entire body quaked. She placed a protective hand over her small baby bump. "Why would you do this now when we're starting a family?" Adrian shrugged as though bored. "I told you I'm not sure I want this child. And you were too consumed with your charity work, your marketing projects, your perfect illusions." He rubbed his temples. "I need something else." Michelle felt the last remnants of her fairy tale crumble at her feet. She had no words. The silence suffocated them both until she tore up the staircase, tears staining her cheeks, and locked herself in a guest bedroom. She packed only a small suitcase with clothes, her laptop, and essential documents. She took one last look at the mansion's corridor, the intricately carved wainscoting, the glistening chandeliers, and walked out. Outside in the driveway, she realized she had nowhere to go. Their entire life was in that home. She had few close friends in St. Louis, and her parents lived in a modest townhouse that hardly had space for another occupant, let alone a pregnant daughter. Pride also kept her from wanting to face them with such heartbreak. The only option left was her car. It was a 2012 Toyota Camry, a gift from her dad when she graduated college. Michelle sat in the driver's seat, scanning her phone contacts, searching for someone. Anyone she could call at midnight. She felt sick physically and emotionally. The baby in her womb deserved so much better than this turmoil. But she couldn't think. She turned the ignition and drove aimlessly through dark roads, tears streaming down her face. Michelle ended up parked in a quiet corner of a 24-hour supermarket lot, the fluorescence of streetlights giving the place a ghostly glow. She tilted her seat back as far as it would go, hugging a soft blanket around her shoulders. Every so often, a security guard's flashlight beam would slice through the darkness, but no one questioned her presence. The hum of cars and the shuffle of late-night shoppers became her lullaby for a night she'd never forget. Morning sickness assaulted her in the early hours. She stumbled out of the car, nausea rolling through her. She barely made it to a nearby patch of grass in time. By dawn, she was exhausted physically and spiritually. She tried calling a few acquaintances, only to reach voicemails. The clock crept toward 8 a.m., and Michelle realized she needed a plan, and fast. She thought of her friend Kelly Reyes, the PR specialist who had warned her. Taking a chance, she dialed Kelly's number. Kelly answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. But when Michelle's tear-strained words spilled out, Kelly became fully alert. "I'm on my way," she said. Within half an hour, Kelly arrived with a to-go mug of chamomile tea and a sympathetic hug. They drove to a nearby diner. Over eggs and toast, Michelle recounted the entire ordeal, Adrian's affair, His callous confession, her departure in the middle of the night, and now her uncertain future. Kelly pressed her hand gently. "Michelle, you can't live in your car. Come stay with me. My apartment isn't huge, but at least it's a safe space." Relief and gratitude flooded Michelle. She agreed. That morning, she packed what few belongings she had in her trunk and followed Kelly's sedan to a modest one-bedroom apartment near Washington Avenue. True to her word, Kelly cleared out a space in the living room, setting up a cozy air mattress and some bedding. For the next few days, Michelle attempted to compose herself. She needed to think through her next move. Should she file for divorce? Try to reconcile? Demand spousal support? The thought of confronting Adrian again made her stomach twist with both anger and a lingering sense of betrayal. Meanwhile, Kelly insisted she speak to a lawyer. "You're pregnant with his child," Kelly reminded her. "You have rights." Michelle booked a consultation with a well-known family law attorney, Lisa Green, who had handled high-profile cases involving wealthy spouses. The law firm had references from one of Michelle's philanthropic colleagues, so she felt at least somewhat secure in the attorney's expertise. Arriving at the downtown office, she was ushered into a minimalist conference room with sweeping views of the Mississippi River. Lisa was all business, her precise words delivering a brutal reality check. "Adrian has considerable assets. If he contests custody or tries to limit child support, we'll have a fight on our hands. But you have strong grounds here, given the infidelity and your unborn child." Michelle nodded, chewing her lip. Money, ironically, was the least of her worries. Her heartbreak overshadowed any financial concerns. She wanted to ensure her baby would have a stable future. Yes, but what she truly yearned for was an end to the nightmares. Each night, she dreamed of Adrian's cruel eyes of the woman in the black dress and the heartache that followed. She awoke each morning, trying to tell herself it was just a nightmare, only to recall it was all too real. After a week spent mourning her marriage, Michelle received an unexpected email. The sender's address was cryptic, email protected. The subject line read, "Urgent meeting request RE. Adrian Parker." Her pulse spiked as she clicked it open. "Dear Ms. Parker, you do not know me, but I possess crucial information about Adrian Parker that could affect your future and the future of your child. I would like to discuss this with you in person. I assure you I have nothing to gain but the truth. If you're willing, please meet me at 7 p.m. tomorrow at the Riverfront Overlook Cafe in Forest Park." A friend. Michelle's skepticism flared. This had to be a trap, or at best a ruse by some tabloid seeking a juicy story. She forwarded the email to Kelly, who shared her caution. "You can't just go alone to meet a stranger who claims to have information about Adrian," Kelly warned, brow furrowed with concern. Yet curiosity gnawed at Michelle. What could this person possibly know? Was there more to Adrian's affair, or some hidden aspect of his business dealings that explained his sudden coldness? If it led to answers or even closure, she had to pursue it. At exactly 7 p.m. the following evening, she entered the Riverfront Overlook Cafe, her stomach swirling with nerves. Kelly accompanied her, albeit seated a few tables away, trying to blend in with the evening crowd. The cafe buzzed with chatter from university students, families and couples seeking a scenic view. Michelle's breath caught each time the door opened. Finally, a man in his early 50s, wearing a tweed blazer and carrying a small leather briefcase, stepped in. He scanned the room until his gaze settled on Michelle. He approached her table, removing his hat politely. "Michelle Parker?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, swallowing hard. "My name is Charles Reynolds," he continued. I used to be an accountant for Parker Grant Holdings." Charles sat setting his briefcase on the seat next to him. With a trembling hand, he opened it and pulled out a slim folder. "I came because I discovered discrepancies in Adrian's finances," he said, voice tense. "And I believe these discrepancies are tied to his personal dealings, possibly including the affair." He sighed, steeling himself. "I know it's not my place, but what he's doing is wrong." I couldn't stay silent anymore. Michelle's heart hammered. "What exactly did you find?" Charles explained that he'd come across numerous unauthorized transfers, totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars from Parker Grant Holdings accounts into a private LLC Adrian had created. Initially, Charles thought Adrian might be funneling money into a new project. But the amounts were suspicious, the timing too erratic. Then Charles discovered that some of the funds were used for extravagant personal expenses, luxury jewelry, five-star hotels, and real estate in a woman's name. The same woman Charles suspected who was pictured in those paparazzi photos. Michelle's blood ran cold. "Why are you telling me this?" Charles's expression softened. "I have a wife and kids. I know how it feels to worry about family. If Adrian is using company funds in this manner, it could lead to major legal consequences, fraud, embezzlement, who knows what else. And he's endangering everyone around him, including you and your child. Not to mention if a scandal breaks Parker Grant. Holdings could implode, leaving you and your baby unprotected." She leaned back, speechless. Adrian's betrayal now extended beyond their marital vows. He was risking everything potentially on some reckless gamble with his mistress. "Is there proof?" She managed, her voice shaky. "Plenty." Charles nodded. "I made copies before I resigned. They're in secure storage, but I can share them with you. I just want to ensure you're prepared. I emailed you because, from what I've gathered, Adrian hasn't treated you fairly. The board suspects something is amiss, but Adrian is cunning. He's managed to keep the truth buried." Michelle's mind spun. This was bigger than an affair. It was a ticking time bomb that could destroy the father of her child and everything she'd worked for. She thanked Charles for his courage. He offered her the folder. Inside were partial statements, redacted wire transfers, and the name of the LLC AP Discretionary Ventures. The word discretionary felt like a gut punch, as if everything about her life had become disposable in Adrian's eyes. Before they parted, Charles gave her a burner phone number. "If you decide to act on this, give me a call," he said. Watching him leave, Michelle felt like she'd stepped onto a precipice. She had a choice: expose Adrian's misdeeds and protect herself, or remain silent and hope the situation somehow fixed itself. She glanced at Kelly, who looked at her questioningly from across the cafe. Michelle and Kelly returned to the apartment, sprawled the documents on the dining table, and pored over them until late at night. The next morning, Michelle made an urgent appointment with Lisa Green, her attorney. Lisa's eyes widened as she skimmed the paperwork. "This changes everything," she murmured. "Adrian could face serious legal repercussions. You may have leverage to secure a fair settlement for you and your unborn child, but it also places you in a precarious position if he learns you have these documents." The question loomed: should they confront Adrian or present the information to the board of Parker Grant Holdings? Should they threaten legal action? Lisa advised caution. "We should approach this step by step. Let me discreetly speak with a colleague who handles corporate fraud. In the meantime, keep these documents hidden and stay safe. Adrian is known to have powerful allies." The storm gathered and Michelle felt it in her bones. She reached out to Adrian's personal secretary, a polite but guarded woman named Jenna Patterson, to request a meeting. Jenna sounded surprised, but eventually fit Michelle in for a lunch the following week at a well-known steakhouse Al's on First, presumably because Adrian liked to maintain appearances in public. Perhaps he thought it was safer to meet there than behind closed doors. When Michelle arrived, her stomach churned with anxiety. Adrian sat in a private booth checking his phone. He was impeccably dressed, as always, but lines of stress etched his forehead. The moment Michelle slid into the seat opposite him, a tense hush fell over them. "Well," Adrian said, swirling a glass of water. "You wanted to meet." There was no greeting, no concern for how she was. No mention of the child she carried. Michelle inhaled deeply. "I want a divorce, Adrian." He twitched through, whether from shock or annoyance, she couldn't tell. "I should have expected this." His tone was dismissive. "Let's talk settlement. I'll give you a lump sum you sign NDAs, and we never see each other again." She narrowed her eyes. "It's not that simple. I have proof you're misusing company funds." His face paled. He set down the glass a little too forcefully, water sloshing. "Where did you get that?" His voice was low and threatening. She held his gaze, even though her heart hammered like a drum in her chest. "I'm not going to reveal my source. But if you continue this path, it will destroy everything, including Parker Grant. If a fraud investigation is launched, you could face jail time. Do you have any idea what that would mean for our child?" Adrian's facade cracked, revealing panic. He pressed his lips together, glancing around to make sure no one overheard. "You think you can blackmail me?" he hissed. "Because that's what this is, Michelle." She shook her head. "No. I just want to ensure I'm not left picking up the pieces. I want a fair divorce settlement, child support, and an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. That's all." He leaned back, exhaling. A conflicted flicker crossed his features. "You're pregnant with my child," he said, quieter this time. For a moment he sounded almost remorseful. Then the hardness returned to his eyes. "Fine," he muttered. "Draw up your terms, give them to your lawyer, and we'll discuss. But if you so much as leak those documents, I'll make sure you regret it." Michelle refused to wilt under his threat. "Stop funneling money to that mistress. End it, Adrian, or I swear the board will know by the end of the week." He stared at her for a few seconds, a swirl of anger and dread behind his gaze. Then he rose and threw a few bills on the table for the untouched lunch. "Have a nice day," he said tersely, and walked out. As Michelle drove away, she glanced down at the seatbelt crossing her belly and whispered a silent prayer for her baby. She knew she was gambling with forces much larger than herself, but she had no choice. She had to protect her child's future. Over the next few days, Michelle felt no relief, only a building sense of danger. Adrian hadn't reached out with any official statements or settlements. She feared he might be plotting something more nefarious. Sleepless nights plagued her. Kelly kept reassuring her that Lisa Green's legal team was strong and that Charles Reynolds was still willing to testify if needed. Then a surprising message arrived in Michelle's email. Subject: another friend. Inside, she found an invitation to a second secret meeting at a private lounge in the Chase Park Plaza Hotel. The email claimed this meeting involved interested parties from Parker Grant Holdings who wanted to speak with Michelle discreetly. Her first instinct was to reject it. She'd had enough cloak and dagger encounters. But Lisa urged caution and curiosity. It could be board members who want to handle this matter internally. If they're offering a private meeting, it might lead to a swifter resolution. So a few nights later, Michelle found herself in a luxurious, dimly lit lounge. She recognized a hush-hush ambiance, plush seating, low chatter, and elegantly dressed patrons sipping top-shelf liquor. She wore a simple black dress that comfortably accommodated her small baby bump. Kelly accompanied her for moral support, waiting in the lobby. Michelle was directed to a secluded corner table by a hostess who nodded politely and said, "They're expecting you." She saw two people seated there. A man in his early 60s with sharp features and steel-grey hair, and a woman in her 40s, statuesque and dressed in a tailored navy suit. Parker, the man greeted standing to extend a handshake. "I'm James Caldwell, a senior board member at Parker Grant. This is Donna Morrison, our general counsel." Michelle felt her pulse spike. The upper echelon of Adrian's company was here face to face. Donna offered a measured smile. "Thank you for meeting us. We're aware of the situation with Adrian, at least partially. We wanted to see if we could come to an arrangement that avoids further public scandal." Michelle's throat went dry. She sipped her water, trying to maintain composure. "What do you propose?" James leaned forward, tenting his fingers. "We need to protect the company's reputation. Adrian Parker has been a strong driver of growth, but we're concerned about his recent personal conduct. The board is preparing a strategy to remove him if he doesn't comply with our demands. Demands that include ceasing any inappropriate use of company funds. We've done some digging ourselves and found enough red flags to warrant an internal audit. But we'd like your cooperation." "Cooperation?" Michelle asked, trying to mask her skepticism. Donna nodded. "We'd like you to share any documents or evidence you have. In exchange, we'll ensure you receive a fair settlement from Adrian. The board can exert pressure on him to finalize the divorce terms advantageously for you. Additionally, we can offer you financial protection and escrow account in your name while the dust settles." It was an unexpected lifeline, one that felt almost too good to be true. "Why are you willing to help me?" Michelle asked, voice wary. James's expression softened. "Mrs. Parker, you're carrying Adrian's child. Any scandal that drags you through the mud will reflect badly on Parker Grant. Also, believe it or not, some of us still hold on to a sense of decency. We don't want to see you destroyed by Adrian's irresponsibility." Michelle mulled it over her mind, darting between possible traps. She couldn't deny that an alliance with the board might protect her in ways she couldn't manage alone. If Parker Grant turned on Adrian, he'd lose a powerful pillar of support. "All right," she finally said. "I'm willing to cooperate. But I want to make sure I come out of this with the means to support my baby. I also want to ensure that Adrian is held accountable for his actions." Donna slid a business card across the table. "Understood. Contact me directly with the documents. We'll handle the rest. Of course, we'd appreciate your discretion." The meeting concluded with polite nods. Michelle felt a strange sense of relief, but also fear. She was stepping deeper into a corporate chess game. One wrong move, and she could lose everything. A week passed, and Michelle complied with the board's request. She forwarded sanitized versions of Charles's documentation to Donna Morrison. Parker Grant's internal audit team got to work immediately, quietly verifying the details. Charles, still in hiding, confirmed that he would speak to them if necessary, but only under legal protection. In the meantime, Adrian made one last, desperate move. He showed up at Kelly's apartment, unannounced. Michelle was napping when she heard frantic knocking on the door. She opened it to find her estranged husband looking disheveled and furious. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, protective instincts flaring. He barged in, ignoring her question. "So this is how it's going to be." He waved some folded papers in her face. "I got wind of your meeting with the board. You're siding with them." She stepped back, trembling but resolute. "I'm siding with what's right," she said, her voice nearly breaking. "You cheated on me, Adrian. You took money from the company. You left me pregnant with nowhere to go." He flung the papers onto the coffee table. They were copies of the internal audit's preliminary findings. "You think you're so righteous. You want to tear me down. You don't realize that if Parker Grant goes under, you'll be left with nothing. The board will wash their hands of you." Michelle's eyes welled with tears, but she refused to back down. "They've given me their word," she said, voice unsteady. "They'll protect me and my child, something you failed to do." Adrian stared at her belly bitterness, twisting his features. "You still think I'm the villain here?" he asked, hands shaking. "I wanted a different life, Michelle. But you forced me into this." A wave of anger surged in her. "Stop blaming me for your choices," she shouted. "I never forced you to have an affair. I never forced you to embezzle funds. You did that. You ruined our family." In that moment, he looked at her, with a flash of something akin to regret. But it disappeared as soon as it appeared. Without another word, he stormed out. Kelly came rushing out of her bedroom, alarmed. Michelle, trembling, sank onto the couch. "He's desperate now," she whispered. "Who knows what he'll do?" 2 days later, the board convened a secret session. They invited both Michelle and Adrian. Donna Morrison had orchestrated it carefully. It took place in a private conference suite at the Ritz-Carlton, St. Louis, a neutral, discreet location. The suite boasted soundproof walls and heavy doors that guaranteed privacy. Michelle arrived with Lisa Green, and to her surprise found the entire Parker Grant board present: James Caldwell, a few other directors, and an external forensic accountant. Adrian was already there, accompanied by a high-powered attorney and his mistress, the same brunette from the scandalous photos, seated quietly in the back, eyes scanning the room nervously. Michelle felt a pang of envy at the woman's perfect poise, but she reminded herself this was about the baby, not jealousy. James Caldwell spoke first. "We're here to discuss serious allegations. Our audit indicates that you, Mr. Parker, misappropriated company funds for personal use. Additionally, your actions have placed the firm's stability at risk. Our investors and clients could suffer irreparable harm if this becomes public. We demand accountability." Adrian's attorney sprang to his feet, disclaimers at the ready, but Adrian waved him down. He looked exhausted, older than his 36 years. "I'll pay back what I took," he said, voice lacking conviction. "We can settle this internally. There's no need for legal charges." His eyes flickered to Michelle, a mix of anger and pleading. "Let's just handle this quietly." Donna Morrison glanced at Michelle, then said, "Before we decide on how to proceed, there's the matter of your marital dispute, Mr. Parker. Michelle has evidence of your wrongdoing. The board has reviewed it. Our recommendation is for you to finalize a divorce settlement that adequately provides for your child. Immediately." Adrian's jaw clenched. He stole another glance at his mistress, who looked distinctly uneasy. "Fine," he spat. How much Michelle bristled at his callous tone. She hadn't come here to haggle like it was a flea market. Lisa Green calmly slid a settlement proposal across the table. Adrian's attorney scanned it, eyes widening. Then Adrian snatched the document from him, quickly flipping through the pages. "This is absurd," Adrian growled. She gets the lake house spousal support for years. Joint custody with a guaranteed monthly stipend. Michelle steadied herself. It's for the baby's future, she replied. You have more than enough, Adrian. Don't pretend you can't afford it. A tense silence hung in the air. James Caldwell cleared his throat. Mr. Parker, if you refuse, we'll proceed with legal charges. You'll likely lose everything anyway, including your ability to hold any future executive position. We can't risk the reputation of Parker Grant by allowing your misconduct to continue. Adrian glared at each board member in turn, then at Michelle. Finally, he slumped in his seat. All right, he muttered, signing the document with a flourish of anger. You win. A surge of relief coursed through Michelle. Yet strangely, part of her felt hollow. This was the father of her child, reduced to a cornered man forced to sign away his marriage. Could there have been a time when they might have saved their love? She pushed the thought away. That time, if it ever existed, had long passed. Adrian's attorney gathered the papers looking like a man who'd just lost a high-stakes poker game. James Caldwell nodded gravely, signifying the meeting's end. The board swiftly exited, leaving Adrian, his mistress, Michelle, and their respective attorneys. Michelle turned to leave, but Adrian unexpectedly grabbed her arm gently this time. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, voice raw. Just know I'm sorry. His eyes flicked to her belly, then darted away. She swallowed hard. There was nothing left to say. In the days that followed, an official announcement declared Adrian Parker would be stepping down from Parker Grant Holdings to pursue personal ventures. No public mention was made of his indiscretions, and the board quietly reassured major investors that the company remained secure. In exchange for Michelle's silence, she received a substantial settlement and sole ownership of the lake house, a peaceful retreat she'd once fallen in love with during a romantic weekend with Adrian. It felt both ironic and bittersweet to now claim it as part of her fresh start. Michelle moved into the lake house about an hour's drive from St. Louis, nestled near shimmering waters and tall pines. The moment she stepped inside, she felt a wave of memories, some happy, some tragic, wash over her. She cried, allowed herself a final grief for the marriage she had lost, and then set to work making the place her own. Kelly helped decorate the nursery, choosing pastel tones and gentle themes. Michelle enrolled in a local prenatal class, forging new friendships with expectant mothers who had no clue about her tumultuous past. She kept in touch with Charles Reynolds, who informed her that the board had offered him a quiet severance package. He was moving to Denver for a new start. Thank you for believing me, he told Michelle in their final conversation. I hope you find peace now. One crisp autumn afternoon, Michelle stood on the lake house's deck, wrapped in a sweater cradling her growing belly. The wind rustled the leaves, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, she noticed a figure approaching. Her heart skipped. It was Adrian. He must have followed her address from the divorce papers. She couldn't pretend she was happy to see him, but she didn't feel the same fury she once had. He stopped a few steps away, hands in his coat pockets. Hey, he said softly. Hey, she replied, trying to steady her nerves. He looked thinner, wearier. I won't stay long, Adrian added. I wanted to see if you're okay. She pressed a protective hand over her belly. I'm managing. After a moment, she asked, How's your, new life? He shrugged, forcing a hollow laugh. Not as glamorous as you might think. The board froze me out of everything. My relationship. didn't last. Turns out she was in it for the money. Silence stretched between them. Finally, he glanced at the lake eyes, distant. "Michelle, if you ever need anything, for the baby, I'll be here." In that moment, she saw a glimmer of the old Adrian, the one she fell in love with at the snack table years ago. But the pain he'd caused her was too deep to brush aside. "Thank you," she said, mustering the barest civility. "But let's keep communication to what's necessary for our child." He nodded, understanding. "I'm sorry," he murmured again, then turned and walked away. Michelle watched him leave, tears stinging her eyes. Tears of finality, acceptance, and the faintest hope for a better future. Months later, Michelle gave birth to a baby boy, Ethan Harris Parker, in a small but welcoming local hospital. Kelly was with her in the delivery room, holding her hand as she labored. The moment Ethan let out his first wail, Michelle experienced an overwhelming flood of love she never imagined possible. She had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and corporate deception to arrive at this sacred moment of life. Adrian visited a week after Ethan's birth, bringing flowers and a hand-knitted baby blanket, likely from a store, but she appreciated the gesture anyway. He looked awkward, unsure how to hold the baby. Michelle guided his arms and he gently cradled Ethan, his eyes brimming with emotions he struggled to express. For a split second, Michelle saw regret flash across his features again. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan became Michelle's entire world. She established a home office, leveraging her marketing expertise to start her own consulting firm, catering to small businesses and non-profits. Word spread quickly about her integrity and passion, and soon she was taking calls from clients in Chicago, Atlanta, even overseas. She was determined to raise Ethan with a balance of financial stability and moral grounding, the very values she believed in, far from the illusions of wealth that had once ensnared her and Adrian. Adrian wrote monthly checks for child support, never missing a payment. So hot. He remained at arm's length, visiting Ethan on scheduled weekends, playing the role of a well-meaning but distant father. Michelle recognized that while Ethan deserved to know his father, she had to protect them both from the emotional volatility Adrian still harbored. Over time, Adrian's visits became more regular, and though Michelle never fully let her guard down, she appreciated that he seemed to genuinely care about their son. Ethan's first birthday arrived on a sunny spring afternoon. Michelle hosted a small gathering at the lake house, inviting friends like Kelly, a few neighbors, and some of her new mum friends from the prenatal classes. A modest balloon arch framed the porch, and a homemade cake awaited the birthday boy's messy delight. To Michelle's surprise, Adrian showed up alone, his hands filled with wrapped presents. He offered a stiff smile and a nod, staying mainly on the periphery of the festivities. When it came time for Ethan to attempt his first taste of cake, Adrian joined Michelle by their son's high chair, snapping pictures with his phone like any proud father. For a moment, the three of them formed a fragile tableau: a mother, a father, and a laughing, frosting-smeared toddler, caught in an unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, they could navigate a future where heartbreak no longer defined them. After the guests left, and Kelly had helped clean up, Adrian lingered. He strolled out to the deck where Michelle was taking a final look at the leftover decorations. The water gleamed under the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. "This place is beautiful," Adrian remarked, his voice subdued. "I can see why you love it here." She nodded, arms folded. "It's peaceful. Ethan can grow up away from all that chaos." He sighed, I understand. I'm glad you're both doing well. In the silence that followed, Michelle realized she felt no anger now, just a faint ache for what could have been. Still, the decision had been made, and she had chosen her dignity and Ethan's well-being over illusions of a fairy tale marriage. "We're all trying to heal in our own ways," she said at last. Adrian gently placed a hand on her shoulder, just a momentary, tentative connection. "Thank you for letting me be a part of his life," he said, voice tight with genuine emotion. Then he left his footsteps, softly fading as he walked away. Years passed, but the lessons never faded. Michelle Parker, once known only as the wife of Adrian Parker, had redefined her identity. No longer tethered to the illusions of wealth or the trauma of betrayal, she stood as a beacon of quiet strength, a mother, a businesswoman, and a survivor of one of the most difficult periods in her life. Her consulting firm, Parker & Hart Strategies, had grown well beyond her initial expectations. She now employed a small team of passionate professionals who shared her mission to help non-profits and small businesses tell authentic stories and reach real people. Her clientele stretched across the country, and Michelle found joy not in boardrooms or gala halls, but in the everyday wins, helping a women's shelter double its donations, guiding a local cafe to build an online presence, mentoring interns who reminded her of herself a decade ago. But her greatest joy remained her son, Ethan. Ethan was now a bright, curious toddler, with Adrian's piercing eyes, but Michelle's quiet strength. He loved puzzles, adored animals, and had an odd habit of falling asleep during car rides, no matter the distance. Michelle took him everywhere from weekend markets to beachside road trips. Every time he giggled or wrapped his little arms around her neck, she felt a kind of love that eclipsed anything she'd known before. It was not rooted in promises or wealth, it was pure, unconditional. Adrian, for his part, had become a subdued figure in their lives. Their co-parenting arrangement, while not warm, was functional. He never missed a scheduled visit and kept his financial commitments without question. The scandal had forced him into exile from the business world, but Michelle suspected that deep down, he understood the gravity of what he'd lost, not just a career, but the chance at a true partnership, a real family. Still, she bore him no hatred anymore. Time had dulled the blade of her wounds. What remained was a scar, a reminder, but not a prison. One afternoon, as she rocked Ethan to sleep in the nursery, they'd painted soft green. Michelle thought about how different life looked from what she once envisioned. She used to dream of limousines and gala nights, designer shoes and luxury travel. Now she craved slow mornings, the smell of pancakes on the stove, the soft sound of Ethan breathing on her shoulder, and she had built it all herself. Kelly remained her closest confidant, a sister in every way, except by blood. The two often laughed about the early days when Michelle was sleeping in her car, uncertain if she would even survive the heartbreak. Kelly had moved in with her boyfriend, now fiancé, and the two couples often met for dinners. Kelly's unwavering support had been a lifeline, and Michelle knew that she would never forget the hand that reached for her when she was at her lowest. Occasionally, Michelle would receive a letter from Charles Reynolds, now living a quiet life in Colorado. He always asked about Ethan, always signed off with encouragement and praise. "You chose integrity over convenience," he once wrote. That's rare. That's powerful. On the 3rd anniversary of Ethan's birth, Michelle stood by the lake just after sunrise. The wind kissed her face and the sun filtered through the trees, casting long golden streaks over the water. She watched Ethan play with a stick near the shore, giggling at the ducks paddling past. In that tranquil moment, she realized something simple but profound. She had made it. Not just survived, but grown, rebuilt, flourished. Her life was not defined by the man who once broke her heart, nor by the house she had fled, or the scandals that briefly gripped her world. Her life was her own now, every moment of laughter, every small victory, every lesson hard won. And more than anything, it was defined by the love between a mother and her child. Later that evening, as she tucked Ethan into bed, he looked up at her with sleepy eyes and whispered, "You're my favorite person." Tears welled in Michelle's eyes, and she kissed his forehead. "And you, my little one, are my entire world." She turned off the lights and stepped into the hallway, her heart full. In the silence of the house, she opened her laptop to respond to a client's email. But before she typed a single word, she looked out the window toward the lake and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning," because endings, Michelle had learned, are not final. Sometimes they are the doorway to a life more beautiful than you ever imagined. Thank you for joining me on Michelle Parker's journey from a heartbroken wife sleeping in her car to a resilient mother forging a better life for her child. Her story reminds us that no amount of wealth can replace genuine love, integrity, and inner strength. Sometimes life hands us betrayals that shatter our dreams, but as Michelle discovered, every heartbreak can open a door to a stronger, more honest future.